You ready? Yeah. All right. Preference, if you so choose.
Oh, sorry about that.
Thank you. I should have guessed.
Yeah, I also should have thrown my right hand.
It's a small class today.
Yeah.
It's a small class normally. This is a particularly small class today.
Oh, how's everybody doing? Can you show me a thumbs up if you're good and then thumbs up? Okay. Ooh, wow, everybody's good.
Yeah,
Nice.
surprising for a Monday morning.
Yeah. I just came back from Omaha like just before class. So that was fun.
Oh, you left this morning?
Mhm.
Wow.
It was fun. It was fun. So today we're gonna learn about gerunds, absolutes, and infinitives. Okay. So before we start, can you all like find a random object around you? Like, yeah, can you all like, give me something fun? Head or okay. So.
Oh, that's a fun. A giant koosh ball.
Something like that. I don't know. One of the girls from my tech team has a tech. She brought it. Then she left all of a sudden. The tech kids and she left it. I asked a couple of her friends if she wanted it back, and I doubt it. I'm like, okay, I'll keep it. Yeah.
Interesting. Okay. Then yeah, anyone can tell me what activity can your object do? Or what can you do with your object?
I can smack it at Isaiah.
Okay, snacking. Alright, next.
Sorry. You were closer and I thought I could beat you. Yeah, like actually aiming and hitting one of those.
If it wasn't broken, just be able to do this. I mean, it's broken, but other than that, it's more like a fidget toy.
Right. Right. Okay, right. Now how about you?
How do you roll this?
Oh.
I'm just glad to throw it at Nano.
Not a little bit more damage. Melting bottle.
I mean,
Yeah, oh, yeah, that's true.
Oh, wow, I'm glad that you're.
Oh, I love those activities. Okay, then let me see. What was the source of your object? Right, this was a factory, or like a machine made it. I'm guessing. Yeah.
Yeah, factory.
Yeah, factory. Cool. Okay, then what's the purpose of your object?
ball.
A ball? Is it for to do something or
I guess it's just to play with.
to play with? Okay.
Yeah,
Have
it's
fun
toy.
with it? Yeah.
Toy. That's its purpose.
Fun and education.
Okay. How about yours?
It's to keep notes in school and do assignments.
Right, cool. How about yours?
To store water.
Yeah, so, okay, cool. So, today we're gonna learn about gerunds, absolutes, and infinitives. And I'll tell you why I asked you all those weird questions just now later on. So, the first thing we're gonna learn is gerunds. It's an ing verb that functions as nouns. So basically, we change actions into activities by adding the letters ing. So, for example, sleeping. And then you can make a sentence: sleeping prepared me well for class. So in this sentence, sleeping is a noun, an activity. And how do you know? How do you differentiate between noun and activity? Is you can swap sleeping with the word it with the pronoun. So it prepared me well for class. So it means it is gerund. Everybody good so far?
Yep.
Okay, cool. And then absolutes. So absolutes are nouns. Bless you.
Bless you.
Nouns with verbs that end in ing, ed, or en. So basically, absolutes have two functions. They either want to show you the big picture, like a cause or condition, or they want to zoom in and show you the detail, like something that you want to focus on. So, for example, a simple sentence: I sat on another seat, but we don't know what's happening around, what's happening, within that person. So, if you add an absolute, it'll become I sat on another seat. My heart, which is a noun, worrying, which is an ing verb, about the projector falling down. So in this sentence, the function of an absolute is to show the cause why you're sitting on another seat. Okay? Alright, and in this sentence, the projector is situated right above me. I sat on another seat. So this is focusing on something else. And this shows you why you're sitting on another seat. Alright? Okay. And then the last infinitives is a combination between the word to and the verb. So let's say to eat, and we can form a sentence: to eat chocolate chip cookies is my joy. So to eat chocolate chip cookies, this is a noun, it's an activity. Or it can also function as an adjective. My favorite cookies to eat on Warm Cookie Wednesdays are chocolate chip cookies. So what kind of cookies? My favorite cookies to eat. It can be to bake, or to share with people, but in this circumstance is to eat. And then the last one, I'm going to the cafeteria to eat chocolate chip cookies. So if you see an adverb, it functions as an adverb here because here there's a verb. And what's the purpose of going to the cafeteria? To eat. Yeah, so they have these three main functions. Cool. Right. Okay, so now we're going into the activity. So remember the random objects that you take in the beginning of class? Right. So now try putting yourself in the object's shoes, even though they have no shoes, and then write a descriptive story using gerunds, absolutes, and infinitives. I understand that gerunds may be a bit difficult, but just try to incorporate as much as you can. So one example: making friends with the sippy cup has always been my dream. This is the bottle speaking. Yesterday I had a chance. It stood 10 inches away from me, so I started walking over to talk to it. My insides filled with water. So much energy was needed to move that I gave up halfway to it. Okay, so can someone tell me where's the gerund in this example? And the gerund is an action that becomes an activity with an ing. It's in the first sentence of the example.
Would it be the sippy cup and then you replace it in the third sentence by it?
Remember what gerunds are? They are verbs. They have ings, but they function as nouns. That's a good try.
Wouldn't it be making?
Yeah.
That would all kind of make the words that we make it.
That's right. So making friends as an activity. Yeah. And let's see. And then we have absolutes. So absolutes are nouns plus verbs with ing, ed, or en. Let's try in this sentence. Which part? It stood 10 inches away from me. Which part of this sentence? Not this sentence. The last sentence. Which part of this last sentence is an absolute? And now is a verb and ing, ed, or en. And do you really give it a try?
You're
an absolute. Okay. Is it like needed to move?
That was close. That was like the main thing. So the one that describes why it was difficult to move is my insides filled with water. Right, out of this here, if anybody have a question about the three concepts that we talked about just now?
The tricky thing about these is that just like prepositional phrases and what else did we talk about on Friday? Positives. They're basically just adding extra stuff to the sentence. So if you can pick out the main part of the sentence, I gave up halfway toward it. Everything else is typically going to be some other, it's an addition, right? It's a way to make things a little bit more interesting. Could you go back to one of the earlier slides? Further, maybe, no. Stop there. I sat on another seat. Comma, my heart worrying about the projector falling down. I sat on the other seat, on another seat is still, even in the last example, is still a simple sentence, but the projector situated right above me. Just adds a little something. And there's more nuance to this one because it would be really easy to say I sat on another seat because the projector was situated right above me, right? So using like a dependent clause and a complex sentence type of thing is fine. It does the same thing, but in a different way. So if you're looking for nuance, that last sentence, the projector situated right above me as an absolute, it's a really, really kind of, it's a nuanced way of saying it. It's kind of a, it's dressed up. It's all gussied up, right? So go back to that that paragraph or the few sentences that. So that last sentence, what's the main part of the sentence? Right. So what's dressing it up? Yeah. So much energy was needed to move. That's actually so much energy was needed to move that I gave up halfway toward it is a really tricky sentence because it has a relative clause in it. We really haven't talked about those, but this is one of the tricks of teaching, one of the tricky parts about teaching grammar. I don't even have an answer for that. Like, how do you teach this without having already gone through relative clauses, right? So, okay, so we have gerunds. And we have absolutes.
Usually it's used to explain the purpose. So let's look at this sentence. Yeah. So the sippy cup should have just away from the bottle. So why the bottle went over is to talk to it. So that's like basically what this is. Okay?
Yep.
Alright. Before I let you guys try it yourself, like writing a short story about the object. Do you guys have any questions? Ready? Okay. As you write here, here's the examples that we talked over. You can refer to it as you try writing. And if you have any questions as you like, just raise up your hand and I'll go over.
Bless you.
Alright, it's okay if you haven't finished. We'll just take questions. Anyone wants to share first?
This is called beach ball's existential crisis. Sure, I love bouncing. Why wouldn't I? There's more to me than just a bounce. I love teaching kids too. It's my gerund. I love teaching kids. Okay. The problem is kids don't pay much attention to the Iberian Peninsula when they start to pick me up. It's my infinitive, to pick me up. They start to. I just need someone to recognize that I'm more than just a beach ball. Really see me covered in the map of the world. I can be more than just a good time. Covered in the map of the world is my absolute.
How about in the absolute? Are you sure it's an absolute? Remember what absolute is? A noun and a verb with ing. So where's the noun?
It's an understood me. I'm covered in the, no, I can't do it that way. No, that's a good call. It's not right. I'll keep working. It's a work in progress.
Yeah. Okay.
I'll go.
Yeah.
My goal in life is to store water. My ultimate purpose, I will not stop to rest until the end of time. Hydrating Isaiah is what the factory created me to do. So my goal in life is to store water. Infinitive. My ultimate purpose is my my absolute. I mean. And then hydrating Isaiah is my share.
Right. Okay. Oh, that was very interesting. One thing. Haha, it was the absolute again. Can you repeat what your absolute was?
Absolute.
How do you write for your absolute?
Wait, which one was another absolute?
What do you write for absolute in the story? This is my ultimate purpose. Okay. So your noun is your ultimate purpose, and what's your verb?
That's okay. I don't have one there.
Right.
Okay.
Okay, that's it. Yeah, I really love your creativity. Okay, who else would like to check?
I can go, I'm gonna get called out on my absolute again,
It's
probably.
okay.
Making a masterpiece with my owner is the last thing I want for my life. The paper she uses is always a couple inches away. She picks me up again to start another draft. My head starts to spin, so I black out as her hand breaks me across the
I like that. What's your genre?
Making a masterpiece. And then, she picks me up to start is my infinitive. And then my absolute is my head starts to spin, but I know that has to be like ing.
Right, let's see. What do you write after my head starts to spin?
So I black out as her hand breaks me across the page.
We can tweak it a bit like my head starts spinning, so I break out. Yeah. That's good. Okay, B, are you ready to check? I'm gonna go. Okay, you got this.
And then I took this from the tech weekend, so.
Okay.
Sitting on the floor is not my favorite spot. I wish for someone to hold me or toss me around, just anything other than the floor. Someone finally picked me up. They pulled my fringes. And somehow I wish to be left alone.
Oh, that's so sad.
Well, we did abuse it a bit.
Aww.
Yeah. But so sitting on the floor was my jam. To hold or to hold me, I think that's what was my definitive. And then my absolute was they pulled my fringes and stuff. So I don't know. That one's like an absolute or what. I know they's more of a pronoun, I think.
Right, interesting. What do you guys think about they pulled my fringes? Do you think it's
Yeah, I don't know about that one.
Sounds like a simple sentence to me.
Yeah.
That's true, that's true.
So absolutes seem to be the trickiest
Yeah.
pieces. Is that because we just don't use them as often as, or recognize them as often?
Yeah. I think absolutes is quite similar to what someone taught last week. That instead of having nouns inside, you just have the words like, let's see.
Similar to an appositive?
Yes, that's right. And we may be using appositives more often. That's what I find myself. So that may be the reason that it's difficult to understand absolutes.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was a really good try, guys. I really appreciated the creativity. Okay, so we close. So basically, gerunds, absolutes, and infinitives, all of them are used to explain details, means we zoom in, or the context, we zoom out. And so similarly, it's important to understand the small and big things in other people's lives. So just now you guys tried putting yourselves in the shoes of your object. And so, yeah, just remember that. Oh, good job, guys.
Good. I like the that last little bullet. It's important to understand the small and big things in other people's lives. Looking through the selected annotations, a bunch of you commented on how you kind of liked how Krovitz and Devereaux in the book reference almost a moral aspect to language and how we communicate and how we pay attention to others' communication and respect that. So they mentioned that every once in a while, just kind of that ethical connection to what we do and how we do it. So kind of fun to see it in there too. So good. All right. Let's we're going to do a little bit of a review because we're about halfway through the lesson. So so far, this is the list of things that officially we've talked about: simple sentences, compound sentences, subordinated conjunctions, dependent clauses, complex and compound sentences, active versus passive voice, prepositions, appositives, and participles, and then today, absolutes, gerunds, and infinitives. So it's a lot of different things, and I'm not necessarily expecting you, and I mentioned this at the beginning, and I'll mention it now, and I'll mention it again when we get to the exam. I'm not expecting you to be able to define every single one of these things. I do want you to be able to start picking out interesting grammatical devices, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you have to pick them out and label them accurately. But I do want you to recognize what authors are doing, why they're doing it, how they're doing it, just so it benefits your own writing, it can benefit your students' writing. When we first started, I mentioned that if you want to teach grammar, you have to do two things. Number one, you have to simplify it. I think you've done that. I think you've done a really good job of it. Trying to simplify definitions for like complex structures, it's not always easy. But I think it's gone really well. Okay. So thing one, simplify it. Thing two, teaching it in context. I think you've done a good job with that as well, but I wanted to give us a little bit more practice with that. So I'm going to introduce you to a dude named Michael Perry. Michael Perry is one of my very favorite authors. He's a Wisconsin author. He's kind of a rural author. I really hate the word rural. It's a horrible, horrible word. Anytime you have like two R's in a short, like hard R's in a short word is just awful. Michael Perry is, I kind of like to describe him as a redneck hick who's got a larger vocabulary than I have. If you grew up in a community like this, or like northern Wisconsin, he's kind of your dude, especially if you're into like all things Englishy. So this is creative nonfiction. He writes a lot of creative nonfiction. He's written a couple like children's stories and a couple of fiction books, but primarily it's creative nonfiction. And before you start reading, before you dive in, recognize that creative nonfiction is very, very different than traditional fiction, and it's very, very different than like traditional fiction, right? I mean, it's kind of a melding of the two things, right? So you have some creative structures, but you also, you're not necessarily starting from scratch. So this is just an essay, a short essay, comes out of this book. Every single essay in here is about 2 pages long. We're going to start by just reading it once because it's really super short. Read it once just to enjoy it. I have this poetry conundrum. I don't know if you've ever had this in high school English or something, where a teacher gives you a poem and you like the poem, and then you tear the poem apart, and suddenly you stop liking the poem. Does that ever happen? Or a short story or a book that you dissect something and you destroy it when you dissect it, instead of, letting it live and breathe and stuff. So read it just to enjoy it, and just think about the storytelling and tell me when we get to the end, we'll have an opportunity to just kind of share out what jumped out at you. So read with the pen in your hand and just kind of take note of the things that might jump out at you as far as like the storytelling and the narration. story be like? A narration. This is a vignette, right? Vignette is basically just a snapshot, just like a quick Polaroid of one day in the life of, right? Usually it is accompanied by some reflection or something like that. What are your thoughts just on what is said, what is written?
I really like the illustrations the author used.
Yeah.
In the first paragraph, he described the way that the bad roof of the machine gun and speedpipe.
Machine gun with spitwads. Yeah. The first paragraph, I like the putting thick air. I used to live in South Florida, and in the summer, I'm an asthmatic. You get asthma every once in a while, and like, it was really hard to manage anything in a place like that. 95 degrees and 95% humidity. It felt like I was, breathing soup through a straw. Other things.
I like he's kind of sarcastic or snarky in the fact that he'll add kind of a positive tone on something that's not so positive, like when he's talking about, he's got like a kid who likes to do plays, but he likes to counterbalance that with your precious chores that, or what we would constitute as chores that are not necessarily positive, but he, like, oh, the precious counterbalancing.
Yeah. Good phrase. Anything else? There's definite snark in his writing. The attaching of the subclass, otherwise known as. Okay. So what I'd like you to do next is to read it again and think about style and voice. Okay. The style and voice thing. What I want you to do is to pay attention to the phrasing. What phrases just maybe seem like atypical structures? Interesting punctuation, capitalization. How does he do what he does? But what I don't want you to necessarily do is just think that you have to focus all of your time on, oh, this is a great example of an appositive, or oh, this is a great example of an infinitive. If it pops into your mind that this is an infinitive, this is a participial, great, jot that down. But instead of focusing on that, just focus on what makes this writing work, what makes this sentence pop, what makes the contrast of this sentence to this sentence, or this paragraph to that paragraph. Look at the style, okay? So read it one more time and think more about how his writing is put together instead of exactly what he's saying. And it will be hard to separate the two, and that's intentional. But do the best you can with what you got. Okay. Even if you're not done with it again, let's chat. How does he do what he does? This is a guy who, I mean, he's a professional writer. He might be a regional, rural author. There's that word again. But he's also been shortlisted on the New York Times bestseller list, and he's been a professional author for years and years and years, a professional speaker. And so what kind of tricks does he employ in this tiny little essay?
I really like the second paragraph on the second page. The whole thing is just 2 sentences. And I think that just like shows how good of a writer he is, because it doesn't feel like a run on and it doesn't feel exhausting. It just feels like a very intentional reflection, and like a less experienced author couldn't have made that work in 2 sentences, but it just, yeah, it shows his talent there.
It's a really good call. 2 sentences for a 10, 12 line paragraph. So what is it about those sentences? How does he put those sentences together? Do you see anything about, are these just compound sentences? Are they compound complex sentences? Or, I know I told you not to do this, but any particular grammatical devices jump out at you when you were reading through that paragraph? Take a look at the second sentence. Starts on the 5th line. When my elder daughter was a teen but still too young to drive, she always knew. Pause there for a second. That's a complex sentence. She always knew. If there was a period there, that would kind of make sense. We're obviously missing something, right? Then he adds another one, which means we have to have another dependent clause coming after it, right? So when my elder daughter was a teen, but still too young to drive, comma, she always knew when she climbed into the front seat for a ride home from volleyball practice, comma, there was a 50-50 shot the old man would be in sermon mode at some point. That could be a period. But he's got one more trick up his sleeve with another little phrase, all the while maintaining a speed that made it impractical to bail out and still be able to play volleyball. And there's that snark again, right? There are a lot of different ways to say this, but to just label it as impractical, that's a very intentional, obvious word choice, which I think softens this massive sentence. And it's a meta-narrative. The story, this is a 2-page short story. And in one sentence, he adds another story to it to try to illustrate a point, right? So a lot of stuff going on in those sentences, but it doesn't seem overly cumbersome. Partially because I think of what he's talking about. If this were about, if this were coming out of a biology textbook, this would be brutal, right? But I think it's kind of softened just because of, this concept of this is my daughter, this is a relationship that I have with my daughter, this is driving home with your old man, and just that sort of relational aspect, I think makes it a little easier to handle. Other things that jumped out at you as far as like grammatical devices, punctuation, how he says what he says. Lisa.
I like the transitions the author makes, so he doesn't use the same phrase like after that, then but he uses like by the time I pulled out in front of the theater, when my eldest was 14, and as he made a final turn, so it's like it doesn't feel repetitive, but he weaves everything into a story, and I like that.
Actually wrote down transition too, but it was in between the second and third paragraph. Mostly because the transition is so bizarre. Like normally, when I'm writing, my transition words tend to be subordinating conjunctions. That's how I transition. Because you're very intentionally pulling two opposing concepts together, right? But it's very straightforward because a complex sentence is, well, I've got one idea here, however, here's another idea type of thing. Figuratively and literally, because however is a subordinating conjunction and it's a complex sentence. His is so much more nuanced. Another mile and the winds lifted and the rain thinned. By the time I pulled up in front of the theater, the precipitation had settled to a soft wash. Around here, town is creeping ever closer. And those ideas have nothing to do with each other. I don't understand how that can be a transition, but there's more tricks. He's got more tricks than I do, right? Eventually, he brings it full circle. But yeah, I really like his transitions. Anything else that you noticed about how he put together his writing?
I just realized that you said that the present is only the first paragraph and the last paragraph, and then that will not the first. And then the rest of it is like reflection on the past and what's happening in the town. But
Yep.
yeah, the main, or it seems like the main story is only the very beginning and end.
Yep. And that's actually kind of his bread and butter in these types of volumes. And he's written a couple books like this. Whereas, yeah, first paragraph, last paragraph, and then he kind of has this little reflection piece in the middle. And just when you that starts to get tiresome, he swaps it out and he does like an entire, like another short story, but it's all 100% reflection or all 100% narration. So it's not necessarily just the structure of individual stories, it's also the structure of how he puts them together to make a meaningful whole into the book. Which I think is also important for us to remember, especially those of us becoming teachers, that we're talking about sentence structure, but
We also ought to talk about paragraph structure, and we also ought to talk about how those paragraphs are structured into a cohesive whole. And maybe it's not just teachers in our midst, but how are we writing in such a way that our readers are going to benefit, but they're not going to get bored of us. Anything else from Storm Song?
I like how he says stuff without actually straight out saying it. And he'll like imply a lot of things, or he makes it a lot more nuanced. As you said, like, I am the far end of the dead end road sort of fellow. Like, he could have just said, oh, I live out in like desolate country with like nobody around. I'm just like dead end. But this adds a lot more detail and nuance to it.
Well, and that's reciprocal structure. That's not reciprocal structure. Parallel structure. Far end of the dead end. That just that works as a phrase. It's a brilliant little phrase. Right. One of the things that I really liked is the third sentence. I'll just read the second one to you. I was off for town to retrieve the young one from play rehearsal and paused at the base of the hill to check my phone for storm warnings. Tornado watch, it said, is a really straightforward, that could be a simple sentence, right? It's short, it's straight, it's simple, it's easy. But then there's all this added fluff that comes immediately after it. So you start a sentence with just the details, almost like a newspaper reporter. And then you add all these flowery details after. And just then the rain hit with 1,000 fat smacks. And then finishing with the line that Elisa mentioned. The roof being machine gunned with spit wads. So anyway, there is nuance in the writing that we come across. And sometimes it works really well, and sometimes it falls flat on its face. To me, Michael Perry is an example of really, really good writing, but it's kind of my personal style. I like the guy, partially because he's from Wisconsin, and I got to hear him speak a couple of times, and he writes about my hometown and things like that. Somebody else is going to pick that up and not like the devices that he uses, and that's fine, right? But it's important for us to recognize which devices work for us, which we appreciate, and then can we figure out ways to mimic those? Can we figure out ways to emphasize those? In our writing and in our students' writing. Okay, so here's your homework for Wednesday. Pages 144 to 155. Nouns, Bree, this is yours. I forgot the A.
Yeah.
Sorry about
Did that
that. Nouns can do so much. I mean, it seems simple, but when you're talking about, they can be subjects and they can be objects, and out of the objects, like, nouns are an umbrella concept, right? And there's so much that can come underneath that. So yeah, read pages 145 to 155, 11 pages just about the nouns. Remember selected annotations. There's still a little bit of grace for some of you. Some of you have used up the 4. Some of you are getting close, and that's fine. We still have a couple weeks left. And then after Bree walks us through nouns, I want us to spend a little bit of time on projects, because draft of your paper is due on Wednesday of next week, which maybe should freak you out a little bit. So something to think about, something to work on. And then the final, not final exam, that's, another 3 weeks away, 4 weeks away. But the final draft, the final paper is due 2 weeks from this coming Friday. So in this week, I'll be going through everything and giving you all kinds of feedback and stuff. And yes, it is just a draft, but the more workable the draft, the better the feedback I can give you and the better your final paper is going to be. If you hand in crap in a draft, there's really not a great way for me to fix everything. That's not my job. Okay. So do the best you can on doing a complete draft. Don't feel bad if it's a draft. That's the point of a draft. But the better the draft is, the better the final product is going to be. You know all that stuff already. Okay. And the presentations start 2 weeks from Friday. So just as a bit of a heads up, right? So this is the Wednesday stuff. And I mentioned on Friday of last week that we don't have, no, not Friday, but Wednesday of last week, because we didn't have class on Friday. This coming Friday, we also don't have class. Right? Because I'm away at a conference. One other last note, because I've got 2 minutes, I might as well say it. I'm on jury duty this month. And I have to call in every Monday evening to see if I'm on the books for some sort of trial or something. So just as kind of a heads up, if I call and kind of last minute cancel class, or we do class online or something like that, that's the reason. It's not because I've had enough of you and I'm just cutting out. It's because I'm legally required to be elsewhere. Okay. Any questions? All right. Have a great day.